going on? We are halfway through the John Deere Classic. Going to do a live update, talk about some of the guys at the top of the leaderboard, talk about how we're positioned, look at some of the live stats, see if we find anything interesting that we might want to take a stab at here over the weekend. It's been a pretty crazy event so far, as maybe expected. Have a lot of random names kind of sitting at the top of the leaderboard. Some of those random names are guys that we bet on, so feeling pretty good about this again. I think we got a good sweat coming in for the weekend. Let's dive into it. So if I bring up the current state of the leaderboard, so Luke List is currently solo first. He's 13 under par. He fired off a 63 today, which is pretty crazy. Fired an 8 under bogey-free round to put himself at the top of the leaderboard. Sebastian Munoz is one shot back. He was one of our first round leaders yesterday. So these guys are definitely, not your standard names, but they do have some pedigree. Sebastian Munoz is one on tour. Luke List's been a really long time, but he's one on tour as well. Both of these guys are sitting there at the top of the leaderboard. Then we get into the guys that are sitting here at minus 11, 2 shots back. These are the guys that I am rooting very heavily for. So Adam Schenk is the first guy to get in at minus 11. He shot a 64 today, a 7 under round. He is a guy that I think I mentioned this in one of my videos earlier this week. He's a guy that can get it done in a lot of different ways. I don't know that necessarily plays itself better or worse for this course this week, but he's a guy that I think, again, we'll look at some of the live stats in a second. I think he has a shot. I mean, he's a guy that has been kind of an up-and-comer on tour. He's still fairly young. This is the type of event that these guys can win, right? You don't have your Rorys out there. You don't have your John Rahms or DJs or Brysons or any of those guys, right? So I think we said at the beginning of the week, this is going to be one of those random take guys you don't feel totally comfortable with. Happy to see that one of my guys, Adam Schenk, is sitting there near the top of the leaderboard. We also have Chesson Hadley, Brandon Hagee. These guys basically traded off low rounds the first couple of days. Chase Seifert is another guy that fired one of the low rounds of the day in 8 under par. Those are very viable, possible scenarios for some of these guys we'll look at down the board, right? Like these 62s, 63s, 64s are out there. So in my head, there's a lot of guys that are still in this thing, especially if any of these guys at the top of the board stumble, right? So we'll look at the stats in a second, see how these guys are getting it done, but there's nothing to say that like one of these guys a little further back in the 11s, 10s, I probably wouldn't think further than 8 is still live, but any of these guys could go out and fire a low round tomorrow, catapult themselves up in a significant way on the leaderboard. So some of those guys that did that here today, another one that did that, Lucas Glover. He was a guy that model rated out okay on, didn't use him, not a big Lucas Glover fan. He's kind of, there's always certain guys that you can never get right. He feels like that for me every single time. So I use him, he plays horribly. I don't use him, he plays well. It's one of those weeks. The other guy that we have in the mix, Ches Reavie. So I think, again, he's a guy that hasn't won too much on tour. He's basically won only one event. But of the guys in this field with the right skill set, he's a guy that I think could still contend and continue to play really well. He only shot a 4 under round today, but he fired off a 64 in round 1. He's playing well. He's actually putting this week, which we'll look at in a second, which is crazy because this guy never does that. So, I don't know. A guy that definitely will be keeping an eye on. A little bit further back then, you have Ryan Moore. Actually, these guys I think are all playing together tomorrow. So Ches, Lucas Glover, Ryan Moore, they're all basically the exact same guy. Like if you were to, create in a lab, kind of your typical plotter golfer who can dial it in on approach and make putts occasionally, but not very often. These would be the guys. So it's kind of crazy. They're all going out tomorrow together. They're all sitting there at minus 11. So something to keep an eye on. I'll be watching that group pretty closely. Then you get into the minus 10s. You have Nick Taylor, Patrick Rogers. A little bit further than that, Doug Gim. We love Doug Gim. He's another one of our guys for the week. We'll take a look at his stats in a second, but if he can find a putter, he might be in the mix. This guy's dialing it in, draining it to, 10 feet every time. He just can't make his putts. So hopefully that turns on the weekend. Maybe he'll fire off be one of the guys to fire off a 63, 64 tomorrow and catapult up the board. Then you have some other names. These guys are kind of your been around the block PGA Tour players. None of them are especially great, but playing well this week. So you have Jonathan Vegas, Kevin Na, Jason Duffner, Russell Henley is a guy we talked about early on. Model rated out very well for him. Just couldn't pull the trigger at 20-1. Hank Lebioda is continuing to play well. He's here. And then point out a couple guys. So Cam Champ, no clue how he's doing it this week. He's a guy we can take a look at the stats on. Didn't think that this course would suit him at all. He's kind of a bomber, in terrible form coming in. He's playing really well, so curious to see how he's doing that. A guy that we did bet on is sitting here after firing off back-to-back 67s, Harold Varner. He's a guy that, again, like in this field, I thought, hey, this is a guy that has historically played well in weaker fields, is playing well coming in terms of approach, dialed in with the irons. Maybe he can make some putts and contend. He's right here. He's only 5 shots back. So again, like if any of these guys go out and shoot the low round of the day tomorrow, they'll be right there. This is probably as far back as I would be looking if I were looking at any sort of live outright winners. Again, like there's so many guys up here. So basically there are 23 guys that are -8 or better. And this is such an easy course. It's not unrealistic that one of these guys is going to fire off a really low round tomorrow, maybe follow it up with like a 65, 66 and win it. Like that's an entirely viable scenario. I think that's really hard for these guys down in the -7s to do. You're basically gunning for 20 under par, right? Like that's another way of thinking about this. So these guys that are at, -8 are going to have to go fire off basically 2 rounds of 65 or 1 round of 63 and another 67. Like that is doable, more doable for these 8s than some of these guys in the 7. So just how I'm thinking about it, I think, obviously we have some guys back here as well. Camilo Villegas is a guy that I liked, fired off an awesome 64 in the first round, couldn't hold it together. Other guys that we have down here, I hope I'm wrong. It'd be great if one of these guys could pull it off. Kyle Stanley, Patton Kizzire. Patton Kizzire, man, fired off a 67, had a triple bogey on the card. So he's a guy that could be right up there in the mix if he had just not done that. So I'm not even sure how he did it. I'm pretty sure he had a penalty stroke in there somewhere. But anyway, this is a look at the leaderboard. If you're playing DraftKings, one interesting note for this week, a lot of the expensive chalk. So we didn't talk about Daniel Berger. He at least made the cut. But guys like Brian Harmon, Kevin Streelman, they were pretty highly owned, and none of them made the cut. So again, like we talked about this earlier, one thing I think we got right, those guys sitting in, Brian Harmon was like 16-1 to win, and Kevin Streelman was 20 or 25-1. Like, why do those guys have a significantly better shot of winning than any of these randos? They don't. And it turns out this was a week where they just didn't have their stuff, and they all missed the cut. So feeling pretty good about that in terms of, DraftKings positioning heading into the weekend. So got some guys in the mix. Excited to see. Hopefully we can, pull off another one here this week. That'd be pretty crazy, but not impossible. We got 2 guys only 2 shots back. A couple of guys, maybe 3-4 shots back, but definitely still very live. So let's take a look at the Data Golf live predictive model. So again, this is something I like to use, just trying to gauge things as they currently stand. Obviously, guys that are currently at the top of the leaderboard are more likely to win, but there is an underlying strokes gained kind of predictive aspect to this. So basically, just kind of lay of the land. If you tailed any of my guys for the week or combinations of them, the ones that are in contention, the ones that are kind of at -8 or better, we're looking at about a 20% chance of taking this thing down, which is actually higher than if we had one outright on the guy in first place. So that makes me feel pretty good about where we're sitting. And obviously a lot's going to change over the next day or so. So feeling pretty good about this. Again, it's not an exact science pegging this stuff. You got guys like Brandon Hagee up here. Again, just a bomber, not sure how he's getting it done. We can take a look at him. Patrick Rogers, my guess is these guys are just making every putt, and those guys are probably going to fall back. So hopefully, guys that are ball striking continue to, not miss more than they're making. They're 5-10 footers they're giving themselves on every hole. That's the key to winning. So So yeah, that's interesting. We'll continue to take a look at this because at some point we're going to get a view of what the winning score will be. But right now, my guess is it's going to be something like 21 under par, unless these guys at the top continue to just fire off 64s. Then it'll probably be a little higher. I'm not sure that that's the case. It's really hard to do that. So my best guess is 21, 22 is probably what we're gunning for. So jumping over to the live leaderboard on Fantasy National, again, live strokes gain data for the event. How are folks getting it done? You can see guys at the top here. Again, this was the prototype we talked about earlier in the week. You got to gain on approach, you got to gain a little off the tee, and you got to make your putts. So basically, Luke List, Sebastian Munoz, Ryan Moore, they're all guys that are doing that. Chesson Hadley, Lucas Glover. Ches Reavie is actually putting this week, which is a crazy thing that gives me a lot of good vibes heading into the weekend. Hopefully he can keep that up. Adam Schenk, not so much. So he's actually gaining. He's basically gained almost 8 strokes on and around the greens, which is tough to do. But he's gaining more off the tee. So maybe he'll pull off the Dylan Fratelli model of gaining 10 strokes putting, chipping it in every other hole, and not gaining on approach. I don't really want to rely on that, so if I were probably live betting Adam Schenk, I probably would be looking to maybe take some other guys, but since we have a ticket, hopefully you can flip it with the irons and keep up the hot play elsewhere. So let's just take a look. Who's leading this field in terms of ball striking? So Sebastian Munoz, Luke List, no shock there. They're at the top of the leaderboard. I think it'll be really hard for them to keep this up. Again, like you don't typically see guys gain like 10, 11 strokes in any category, putting, approach, etc. So I think it will be kind of tough for them to keep that up, but not impossible, right? So this is what gives me a little bit more confidence for guys like Ches Reavie. I think we talked about Kyle Stanley because we have an outright on him. He's doing everything except he's missed every short putt, so he's basically played himself out of it by not making anything with the flat stick, but that's kind of what we thought or what we knew we'd going in, right? Like, we're not betting on these guys. We're betting on them for their skill sets in terms of their irons and, hitting fairways and hoping, again, hope is not a strategy, but if you set things up right, odds are one of these guys is going to catch a hot putter, just not Kyle Stanley this week. Doug Gim is another guy that's in that camp. He's at least a small gainer. So, and again, he's historically a better putter on bent grass. So I'm really looking at Doug Gim. I think he has the potential to make a run here. He had a really solid day. He missed a couple short putts and could have, been right up there with the rest of this crew. So I would say, if anyone that I'd be looking at, this is kind of my Cam Davis, quote unquote, pick of the week. Like last week, it would be Doug Gim for sure. Scott Stallings is a guy who lost a ton on the greens today. He was right in the mix, but just kind of played his way out of it. He was actually, I think, was he over par for the round? He might have been 1 under, something like that. But he's a guy I had an outright on, looking really good kind of for the first 9 holes, and then dude just forgot how to putt. So I think that's really interesting. In terms of guys that are just doing it all with the putter, right? So Brandon Hagee, I would not be looking at him. Nick Taylor, I would not be looking at him. These guys are going to regress with the putter. Again, I was maybe wrong on this with Kramer Hickok 2 weeks ago, but historically, this is just not sustainable. Same thing with, Adam Schenk, right? No bias here, calling it as I see it. These guys, unless they turn it around with their irons, are going to have a hard time this weekend. Same thing with Roger Sloan, but he's in that -8 range. Hank Lebioda, is a guy that, again, he might just be a little too far back. I'm not sure. -9 is probably still very live, but he's going to have to keep this up for the next couple days. I know a lot of people kind of jumped on him in fantasy. I know a lot of people have outright tickets on him. I was kind of thinking that maybe last week and the week before, just being in the mix would wear him out, but he's got the pedigree, right? He came out of Florida State, I believe, with guys like Brooks Koepka, Daniel Berger. So he's really good, even though no one's ever heard of him. So I'm pleasantly surprised, even though I will take my L on this one, that he is in the mix and still continuing to play very well. But that said, I still think we got a lot right. So we have a lot of guys in the mix. I had, basically 4 or 5 of my 10, 11 or so outrights, like within a couple shots to the lead. based on data golf, got about a 20% chance heading into the weekend taking it down. And if one of those guys goes out and fires the low round of the day tomorrow, we could be sitting pretty. So hopefully setting up for a fun final round and Sunday sweat. So there's a little bit of the data. Again, guys that I would be looking at would be ball strikers who, again, I don't think Munoz or List are necessarily bad plays. I just think it'll be hard for them to kind of keep it going. Again, Munoz has won before, so I think of any of them, I'd feel more confident in that than I would Luke List, who is historically a trash putter. So just my 2 cents on it. But guys like Jason Duffner, Ryan Moore even, Ches Reavie, Lucas Glover, Doug Gim, Kyle Stanley, if he can just turn it around a little bit with the putter, he's obviously not going to win, but if you're looking at like maybe a live top 10 kind of thing, he might be a guy to take a strong look at as well. So again, that's pretty much it. One guy I thought to point out, again, Mito Pereira is the Korn Ferry Tour 3-time winner, automatic promotion to the PGA Tour. He's a guy to definitely take a look at moving forward. So he made the cut on the number, which is fantastic for my fantasy lineups. But then he's, again, I think he actually gained on approach in round 1. He's one of the leaders in ball striking, certainly off the tee. He's just not making any putts. So maybe as like a showdown play or something, he might be worth a flyer tomorrow. Seamus Power is another guy that I think could still kind of get hot over the weekend. Probably not going to win, but gaining in all categories except the putter, which is something that he was doing fairly well coming in. So maybe looking at him. Harold Varner, steadily improving kind of all aspects of his game. He's another guy that's actually gaining with the putter. So if he can kind of continue to dial it in with the irons, feel a little better about that. Camilo Villegas is a guy that's gaining. So again, if these guys are cheap for like weekend lineups, showdown lineups, things like that, I think they're strong plays. I still think that they have a good shot of, making a top 10 if you can find a good number on them. But I'm thinking at this point they might be a little too far back to try and take this thing down. So yeah, I'm basically, rooting for a handful of guys at the top here. Personally, hopefully we can pull another one off here this week. Be a great kind of streak heading into the British Open, which starts next week. Going to be a little different of a content schedule for that, just given everything's going to lock basically in the middle of the night on Wednesday. So going to try and get some stuff out early in the week. Maybe even try and get out a preview on Sunday if the cards are right. So, again, stay tuned for all of that. We'll do another video update probably on the John Deere, depending on how things are shaking out heading into the final round. But for now, hopefully you guys got something from this. Again, if you have any of these outrights, followed any of my guys that I highlighted for the week, good luck. If you learned something, if you like the content, as always, subscribe to my channel, like the video, and we will talk here very soon before the final round of this John Deere Classic. So I think it's going to be, again, hopefully a fun weekend. Hopefully we can take this thing down. Good luck, and we will talk soon. Thanks, guys.